Chapter-3 Damaged Goods 4 weeks later, Cameron's thoughts were moving at 1,000 RPMs as he stepped out of the taxi that had taken them straight to the heart of Silicon Valley from SFO. It was a 30-minute ride that never took less than an hour, but was at least pretty pleasant if you took the 280 instead of the crapshoot that was the 101. Then again, Cameron had barely noticed the scenery as he sat next to his brother in the back of the cab, going through the heavy folder of company pitch decks they'd brought with them from New York City. After hanging up their oars and officially retiring from U.S. Olympic crew, they dived headlong back into the high-tech entrepreneurial scene that was centered in Silicon Valley. But unlike Zuckerberg years earlier, they hadn't moved west. Manhattan had been the easy choice for their home base of operations. Not only was it a more familiar setting for them, they'd grown up just outside of the city, but their father had made his fortune building a consulting firm that counted many New York-based Fortune 500 companies as clients. To them, no matter where ideas came from or where companies built their fancy campuses, New York City was the financial engine of the world. Since everything they did these days seemed to make the news, when they leased office space in the Flatiron District, the center of New York's burgeoning tech scene, colloquially referred to as Silicon Alley, for their venture firm Winklevoss Capital, the deal was splashed all over the real estate section of the New York Post. With 5,000 square feet of prime commercial real estate a few blocks from the Empire State Building, the twins were definitely looking to make their mark. Becoming angel investors, the name given to investors who provided early money to entrepreneurs with no strings attached, seemed like the quickest way for the twins to get their feet back into the startup game and give them the best chance of changing the ending of the story that had been forced upon them. Their colleague and co-plaintiff in their battle with Zuckerberg, Divya Narendra, had already begun his next chapter. After receiving his law degree and MBA from Northeastern University, he'd gone all in on his new venture, SumZero, a social network for investment professionals. Instead of sharing photos, users shared investment ideas. SumZero didn't have billions of users. Its users had billions of dollars. The company was quickly becoming the world's largest network of its kind, and the twins were excited about investing in it. They wondered, how many more Divyas were out there hiding in plain sight? As an entrepreneur, you had one, maybe two, but usually not more than 3 chances to catch lightning in a bottle. As a venture capitalist, however, you could chase lightning as long as you had the cash to invest. Cameron and Tyler had grown up around financiers. They understood that money was the lifeblood of any company. Without, first, Eduardo Saverin's $1,000, then PayPal billionaire Peter Thiel's $500,000, Facebook would never have grown to be more than a few kids in a dorm room poking each other. It was money that had allowed Zuckerberg to feed Facebook's voracious appetite for engineers and servers, resulting in world domination. Cameron's feet hit the sidewalk in front of a multi-story wood-framed building that squatted between a small paved parking lot and a semi-enclosed beer garden. Just ahead, a brightly colored sign took up one corner of the building, emblazoned with a picture of a palm tree that declared their destination in bulbous orange letters, Oasis, and beneath that, maybe slightly less dramatically, burgers and pizza. Although, as tech VCs, he and his brother weren't going to be coming up with the next Facebook themselves, maybe they would find it. Maybe they would even find it here. Cameron could feel a familiar thrill rising inside of him. They were opening a new chapter in their lives, and he could think of no better starting place than Oasis, the hamburger joint right smack in the center of Menlo Park. He knew that Tyler, sliding out of the taxi behind him, carrying the folder stuffed with business plans of companies looking for venture cash, would have told him to take a breath, temper his optimism. Although most people thought the Winklevoss brothers were completely identical, in fact, they were mirror-image twins, the result of a fertilized egg splitting later than usual in the process, around the 9th day, and then developing as 2 separate embryos. Where fraternal twins were dizygotic, developing from two different eggs fertilized by two different sperm. Identical twins were monozygotic, a single egg fertilized by a single sperm separating into two viable embryos. Mirror twins began in a similar fashion, a single egg fertilized by a single sperm, but remained intact for much longer. Normal identical twins split between the second and fifth day. In fact, it could be said that mirror twins were two individuals who had remained a single entity as long as was biologically possible. Beyond the 10th day, a monozygote that split would most likely end up a conjoined twin, attached forever. Like identical twins, mirror twins had the same physical features, but they were perfectly opposed, as if they were staring at each other in a mirror. If one twin had a birthmark on his left thigh, the other would have the exact same mark on the right thigh. Like two pages in a book torn at the seams, Tyler was right-handed and more left-brained, analytical, measured, and strategy-minded. Cameron was left-handed and more right-brained, tactical, operational-minded, goofy, artistic, sometimes more empathetic, and sometimes more optimistic. Often Tyler focused on the stairs, not the steps, and Cameron was more willing to let his imagination roam past the data they had at hand. Neither of them would have described themselves as poets, but where Tyler focused on the black and white, Cameron tried to let himself see more color. They were both creative in their own intuitive way, and together they knew their minds had the potential to create something great. Now that they were centimillionaires because of their Facebook settlement, few people would understand why they were bothering themselves with trying to start again. The answer was simple. At their core, together as one, Tyler and Cameron were builders. As kids, they built Legos. As teenagers, they built web pages. Despite what Zuckerberg thought of them, his misreading of them as simple, dumb jocks, at the age of 13, they had taught themselves how to code in HTML and had made money over the summer by building web pages for small businesses. At the time, their high school had not offered computer science, so instead they had loaded up on every advanced placement course possible. They had planned to study computer science at Harvard, but the time commitment of the rowing team had made it impossible, so they'd majored in economics instead. Zuckerberg had gotten lucky. In another world, the twins never would have had to approach him for coding help. In any event, Tyler and Cameron didn't believe they were on the earth to exist. They were here to create, to build. And there was no greater place to build the future than Silicon Valley. It was more than a place filled with entrepreneurs toting pitch decks. Silicon Valley was a living, breathing organism. It had a circulatory system, represented by the big-name VCs in their low-rise California ranch-style office parks, lined up along nearby Sand Hill Road. First settled by Kleiner Perkins in 1972, the proverbial Sand Hill was now home to the likes of Sequoia, Excel, Founders Fund, and Andreessen Horowitz, to name a few. Sand Hill pumped cash into the veins of fetal startups, helping them uncurl their tiny fingers and toes. It had its vital organs, the mega companies that had taken that lifeblood and grown viable and strong. Google, up in Mountain View, with its massive campus called the Googleplex. 60 buildings teeming with engineers and software developers and AI experts. Apple in Cupertino, on its way to becoming the most valuable company in the world, in the midst of constructing a new headquarters built to look like a massive spaceship that had crashed down to Earth. Facebook, of course, which had first opened its doors just blocks away from where Cameron was standing, and was now located at one hacker way, spitting out newly minted millionaires every week, inflating the local housing market to the top of the national charts, and making the zip codes around Sand Hill the wealthiest in the United States. Intel and Tesla, and Twitter, on and on and on, each as important to the system as a liver or a kidney or a lung. Then there were the vestigial organs, like the famous HP and Apple garages, tourist spots where visitors could imagine themselves as young genius engineers on the cusp of changing the world. The organism even had its brain, Stanford University in Palo Alto, every year emitting dozens of brilliant young computer scientists and engineers, like neurotransmitters moving along the neurons of the valley's nervous system, teaming up to leap across the various synapses in their paths. And of course, it had its digestive system, the eateries, breakfast spots, and coffee shops where the valley's royalty congregated, sharing innovations over scrambled eggs, chai lattes, and French fries. The oasis might not have been quite as famous as nearby Bucks of Woodside, where PayPal was first demoed, and a VC was once pitched something called Yahoo, but the burger joint and beer garden around the corner from the original Facebook offices had played host to entrepreneurs, investors, and wide-eyed, bushy-tailed valley dreamers for decades. Opened right after Prohibition ended, the casual spot had become one of Cameron and Tyler's favorite places for meetings. In fact, it had originally been a favorite of their parents when they had lived in Palo Alto before moving their young family to the East Coast after their father sold his first company to Johnson & Higgins, one of the largest insurance brokerage firms in the world. Though at first, it had seemed strange, taking meetings in the shadow of Zuckerberg's nearby kingdom. They were well aware that everyone in the valley identified them with the boy CEO anyway, so there was no reason to try and hide from the association. And besides, Oasis served damn good burgers. Tyler reached the door first, but let Cameron go ahead of him as they entered the restaurant. Cameron was struck by the smell of French fries, grilled meat, and spilled beer, even though it was past 2 in the afternoon. The place was packed. Everyone looked impossibly young. Cameron guessed that at least half were still students at Stanford, the rest barely past graduation. He couldn't help wondering how many of the tables he passed were taken up by Facebook employees. As he and Tyler moved through the crowd, people stared and pointed, and then pretended to look away. Nothing really unusual about that. People tended to stare and point wherever they went. Even before the movie, before Harvard, the twins always seemed to catch people's attention. But here was different. Cameron was starting to feel a slight tug at the optimism that had filled him outside. It wasn't just Tyler's usual caution mirrored inside his mind, but something he'd allowed himself to push away during the long flight from New York and the ride from the airport. Although they'd set up Winklevoss Capital a few months earlier and had put the word out that they were looking to invest in young startups, they had yet to close a deal. Although the folder in Tyler's hands was large, many of the companies inside had already moved from possible investments to missed opportunities. Because it was just the two of them, they were able to move quickly when they liked something, setting up calls and flying cross-country at almost a moment's notice when something piqued their interest. But over and over again, mostly because of what appeared to be bad timing, they'd found themselves about to write a check when they'd get a message from the entrepreneur that unfortunately the funding round had just closed or was oversubscribed. Not entirely unusual in a world where multi-million-dollar rounds could come together in an afternoon, and there was so much money chasing the next big thing, but it was still incredibly frustrating. They had money ready to wire, but they could never seem to connect. Cameron had refused to let his optimism fade, but as he followed Tyler through the crowd, passing tables weighed down by pitchers of beer, mountains of fries, charred burgers, and dogs, he wondered if the stares he was getting were indicative of something new. He pushed the nagging thought back down, as over his brother's shoulder he caught sight of a squirrely-looking kid, freckled, skinny, a dagger-like face under a shock of red hair, wearing a bright green t-shirt. The kid was sitting alone at one of the round tables, a half-empty pitcher of beer in front of him, 3 filled glasses at the ready. Tyler reached the table first, and the kid was half out of his chair a second later, nervous and sweaty, shaking their hands like he was trying to pump water out of a well. He was smiling, but even before Cameron had taken a seat next to Tyler, Cameron could tell that something was wrong. He slid into one of the stained wooden booths that was covered in the carved signatures of past patrons. Even here, entrepreneurs were striving for immortality, the chance to be remembered forever. Being memorialized on a few inches of wood in the heart of Silicon Valley was better than nothing. Just a half day earlier, on a phone call before they'd boarded the plane for California, this same kid, his name was Jake, He was 2 years out of Stanford, and his company had just pivoted from mobile advertising into the realm of VR, had been exploding with enthusiasm. Jake was going to be the first real investment of Winklevoss Capital to the tune of $1 million. But less than a minute into the conversation, before Cameron could even taste the beer in front of him, Jake had launched into an apologetic monologue, a sort of verbal yoga tied in so many knots it was hard to understand what the hell he was apologizing for. Until the end, the last few sentences, which were abundantly clear. See, guys, I'd really like to take your money. I thought we were going to take your money. I talked to the board about increasing the size of our round, and, he sputtered. They say we're already oversubscribed, and, we have to turn you down. Cameron could see the splotches of red growing on his brother's cheeks. He decided to speak first, before his brother let his anger get ahead of them. Maybe there was a way to salvage the situation. But when we spoke earlier, you weren't oversubscribed. That was about 8 hours ago. You wanted us on your cap table. We were already talking about giving you free office space when you expanded to New York. Are you saying something changed while we were in the air? The kid ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, we got, oversubscribed. Just be straight with us. We flew out here to sign the stock purchase agreement. Out of respect, just tell us what the hell is going on. The kid paused, then glanced around them at the nearby tables. People were looking, but nobody seemed close enough to hear. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Between you and me, I want to take your money. I just can't. We're oversubscribed. Guys, I gotta go. He started to rise from his chair. Tyler looked like he was about to reach out and grab the kid, but Cameron kept his voice calm. Come on, Jake. Give us a minute. Oversubscribed? Our dollars are as green as anyone else's. Please, tell us what's going on. We deserve that much. It was a hell of a long flight out here, Tyler added evenly. The kid looked around again, then lowered himself back in his seat. He took a drink, rather gulp, from his beer mug, then shrugged. You see where we are, right? Facebook's first headquarters. You could throw a hard drive from here and hit it. Their new headquarters is about 5 miles down that road. Cameron felt himself sinking farther into the booth. He had an idea of where this was heading. You see those kids at that table next to us? Jake continued. I know them. They were in my class at Stanford. They're working on a startup to make digital postcards. What do you think their end game is? Those guys by the arcade machines in the corner, they're working on video compression. Their exit strategy? They've all only got 6 weeks of runway left before their startup runs off a cliff. Entrepreneurship was a game with historically bad odds. Most startups failed gloriously, which meant that every entrepreneur had to go into the business with a plan B, C, D, etc. Silicon Valley was a town made up of engineers who thought in frameworks, decision trees, and game theory. Everyone needed money, but just as important, optionality. When things went bad, and for 99% of the people in that restaurant, they would, a face-saving acquisition, or acqui-hire, by a larger company like Facebook would ensure future funding for their next startup idea. It might be optics, he continued, but optics are important in a land of dreamers. They might want your cash. They might not have anything against you. In fact, they might really like you, but they don't want to cut off all the branches on their tree either. They have other investors too, as well as board members. You think the suits would let them take a penny from the 2 guys Zuckerberg hates more than anyone else in the world? Your dollars might be green, but they're marked. This is crazy, Cameron said. You make it sound like we couldn't even give our money away if we tried. The kid didn't even crack a smile. Not here. Right now, we might as well be sitting in Facebook's cafeteria. Every restaurant in the valley, all anyone is talking about is Facebook. Who are they going to buy next? How many millionaires are they going to mint tomorrow? When are they going to IPO? You should be glad this place will even serve you a hamburger. Silicon Valley may have been an oasis for tech entrepreneurs, but for the twins, even sitting literally in the oasis, it might as well have been a desert. The kid took another chug of his beer. Maybe he hadn't meant it to come out so harshly, but his words hit Cameron like a ton of bricks. All his optimism gone. The fire of redemption that had been growing inside since they'd left Lake Carnegie and the Olympics behind. The exuberance that they could start over and change the narrative and still be part of the entrepreneurial world. Stripped away, smothered, left for dead. This too, somehow, Zuckerberg had taken from them. Jake stood up again, his eyes apologizing, and then reached into his pocket and took a crumpled $20 bill out of his pocket. And Cameron and his brother watched as this kid, who probably didn't have enough money in his bank account to buy a proper wallet, dropped the crumpled bill on the table in front of them. Because in this place, this young entrepreneur chasing his dreams was afraid to be seen even letting the Winklevoss twins pay for his beer.